Hello, and you're watching Broadcasting Scotland, and welcome to the second part of our review of the main news stories for 2021. So from July onwards, myself and my colleagues here are going to look at 6 months, concluding the year. This is Sam Paton, and over there is Brian Liddy. So if you didn't watch the first half, that's still available on our website because Linda Fabiani and Andrew Wilson have already looked over the review the first 6 months of the year. So let's go straight into it. So what were the big news stories in July? I've noticed today that one big thing that stands out for me is that various people in the press were talking about Freedom Day from COVID. Remember that? How did you celebrate?
Oh, that was absolutely hilarious, wasn't it? Freedom Day from COVID, as if it was we were going to escape a virus. I think the virus had different plan for us, as it seems to have looked. What about you, Brian? What did you make of Freedom Day?
Well, I didn't do anything on Freedom Day because I was in Scotland, whereas Freedom Day only really happened in England.
In freedom-loving nations, of course. In Scotland, we didn't stop wearing the masks. The First Minister, of course, announced we jumped straight to level 0, I think it was called at the time, which isn't really level 0. It means we still try to, the First Minister's been emphasising ever since, wash hands, wash surfaces, wear face masks in public places.
Yeah, things never changed in Scotland for us. We carried on wearing face masks. We still observed social distancing, and we still observed, even businesses and things still observed a basic amount of safety with their colleagues and for their customers. So, yeah, I never really noticed much different. What about you? I know you says you didn't really notice much different either, but
No difference at all. But looking back on the year in terms of COVID, I seem to remember that twice before the Omicron appeared, Scotland managed to get the number of deaths due to COVID down to 0, and then eventually the numbers came back up again, and I personally I think that's probably because England relaxed too soon.
Yeah.
And as you know, we've got a common land border, so as a result of events like Freedom Day and relaxings like Freedom Day, Scotland kind of paid the price, I think.
Yeah, we will, of course, come back to Omicron, which occurs later on in this 6 month review. But I suppose it does emphasise that, as the World Health Organisation is always saying, until we've got rid of it everywhere, then anywhere is still vulnerable, and there might yet be new variants in the new year. So let's just move on in that happy message. Another unfortunate story that has been going on and on throughout this year is the Grenfell Tower disaster in London. Although that was some time ago, the survivors still haven't received adequate compensation. I believe some haven't even been rehoused yet. But the story which came up in July was about the bereaved and survivors taking a court case for compensation. So that one just keeps going on and on, doesn't it? It's not really been resolved. What have you got on that, Brian? If you can.
Me, the thing I remember about that is I remember one day getting up when it was still dark and getting ready to go to work, and listening to the radio in the background and hearing reports that there had been a fire in a building, in a tower block in London, but I had no idea what the scale of human loss at life was going to be. And I'm just appalled that this hasn't been resolved yet in any way. Still people are waiting.
So this story was about compensation and about help and support for those individuals. Now, let's not forget who they were. These are people in relatively cheap accommodation in what's the richest part in London. It's a Conservative-controlled council, isn't it? So that council was responsible for these people, and they've still not really adequately been looked after years afterwards.
Yeah, and also as well, what we need to point out is the regulations in England are completely different from Scotland. We have different building regulations here. But one of the things that, with Grenfell that brought to the forefront was the fact of lack of regulations in building control. And if you take it back to 1985 under Maggie Thatcher, she introduced the competition into building control for private companies, and they're allowed to sign off their own buildings as safe. And she was warned at the time that this could have devastating consequences, which unfortunately resulted in Grenfell to people who lost their lives, people who are still fighting for compensation, people who are still technically homeless because they're in temporary accommodation. And this is still an ongoing saga. And also as well, I know that there was the inquiry where they were actually wanting David Cameron called in to question his input and what he said, his comments regarding the kind of privatisation and regulations. So there needs to be somebody held accountable. The government, the UK government, i.e. the Tory UK government, need to be held accountable for this in a court of law. And unfortunately, it is the vulnerable and the most vulnerable in our society. I'm going to use the word vulnerable again, in our society down in London, who have been affected by this. These people, it's been horrendous what they've had to deal with and what they've had to put up with coming from the establishment to get compensated, because these people lost everything. They lost everything.
Yes,
you mentioned the inquiries, and the times that I've listened in or when I've heard reports that have come out of what's been said in the inquiries again are just incredible. And it's clear that the council, when they were building these flats or when they were deciding how the flats were going to be clad, they blatantly, contractors, everybody, they just said, well, this is the standard that we should do, but this is a lot cheaper. And people were just pocketing money by saving on costs of materials. And they've admitted it, and it's appalling. It's absolutely appalling.
The Towering Inferno. Remember that movie? That must be 30 years ago. That was exactly the plot.
Yeah.
That the building design was according to a certain specification, but once they did it, people were cutting corners, saving money, and the damn thing was a fireball. Now, let's just finally talk about the difference between regulations in Scotland and England. People in Scotland were, of course, I know people in Scotland were shocked at what happened in that tower block. And the reason I know that is because I went along on a Saturday just after, and down the road there to Buchanan Street, and there was a public meeting being addressed by Anna Anwar, and a lot of people came to listen to it, and he and others were speaking and saying how disgusted they were that this could take place in this day and age. So although the building regulations are different here, but people in Scotland really were showing they're with the victims. But what actually, I don't think high-rise buildings in Scotland have the same cladding. That cladding is used in Scotland, but not in high-rise buildings. Is that correct?
I think they're similar. That's been found to be used in certain ones, but the local authorities were very quick to identify buildings that had similar type of materials.
That's true, and I think, but going back further, I think there was a similar incident, but on a much smaller scale in Scotland some years before.
Yeah, that's right.
It was a 10-storey block of flats somewhere down in Ayrshire Coast somewhere, I think, that had similar cladding which caught fire, and as a result of that, changes were made to the legislation and the standards in Scotland, and that's one of the reasons why. So it's another good sign for devolution, I would say.
Yes, so it's about devolution. Scotland does control these things, but it's also about the lack of ability in England of residents to apply proper standards. So there's a lot comes up from that one. And of course, the inquiry you mentioned is still going on. So the official report won't be out until maybe next year. I don't even know if it's next year or a year after. These take a while. So we better move on. There's such a lot that we just don't have time to squeeze everything in. Another issue that came up and will come up again in July was the UK government's Nationality and Borders Bill. It went through a reading in Westminster. It's not finished yet. It's still a bill, so it's still being debated in Parliament. But one of the big debates was in July, on the 20th, in fact. And then it goes to the House of Lords, and it has to come back into the Commons, where it will eventually pass, even if the Lords disagree. It will eventually pass, of course, because the Conservatives have an 80-seat majority. So quickly summarise, who wants to go for that? What are the main points about the Nationality and Borders Bill?
Over to you, Brian.
There's so much to talk about. The first one that springs to mind is that Priti Patel, whose bill this is, she will be able to, as a result of the bill, people who try to rescue a refugee or a migrant from a drowning or a sinking boat can be charged and sent to jail if they try to help a human being in distress.
With human trafficking through trying to save somebody from drowning. Okay, so that's the borders aspect of it. What about the nationality? What does it do to say you are a British national and you can stay here, or you're not quite British, so we might throw you out?
Yeah, it makes life a lot more difficult for people living within the UK borders, and especially people who classify themselves as British, to be then told that they're not British. And because I think part of this as well, I could be wrong, is they were talking about the passports as well, removing people of their British passport, which is absolutely disgusting because, you know, the thing is the UK, the islands of the United Kingdom have been built on immigration throughout the beginning of time. So nobody can truly say that they are, you know, a native British subject. Nobody can, because we've all come from going back ancestors of immigration coming from around the world, and it's absolutely disgusting. But yeah, you're right, this is still ongoing. It's on its second reading in the House of Lords at the moment as of the 21st of December. It's still got quite a few other stages to go. I think it's about 4 or 5 stages to go, but the chances are it is going to pass because the Conservatives are determined to get this through, and this is all part of the Brexit. One of the bases of the One Brexit is for people who believe that people are coming abroad and taking advantage of our jobs and our NHS, which is a load of rubbish. These people enhance our country. We see it in Scotland all the time, where, you know, people coming in from different parts of the world, they absolutely enhance our country, they enhance our culture, they play a major part to our society, and they should be welcomed, not made to be like criminals. And this is unfortunately, being part of the UK, we don't have a say in this up here in Scotland. We are out with this decision.
Again, you'll find in the
sad.
debates in Parliament, the SNP
Yeah.
members of Parliament have spoken against it and voted
But
against
unfortunately,
it.
there's too
outvoted.
little numbers. And it's a shame. It's such a horrible bill. It's a nasty, nasty piece of work. But then again, it's Priti Patel.
Yeah, it's the laws that are coming in the back of this bill are totally insidious as well.
Yeah.
The fact that if one of your parents, you could have been born in Britain and you could, like, I was born in Scotland. I'm 58 years old. My dad was Irish. He was born in an EU country now. Is an EU country now. So I don't think this will happen to me because it's not aimed at me at the moment. I've got the wrong skin colour and the like, but and I'm probably the right religion, but. Technically, if I was to leave the country, travel abroad, and then it's when I would come back into the country, that's when I would find that my status had been, as a British citizen, had been revoked, and that's it. You know, it's, so that's why you'll see a lot of articles talking about how this bill breaks international law. And human rights. So
yes, indeed it does. Yeah, human rights are universal and automatic. You can't reverse them in one country. We better move on now. We're going to move on to the month of August. 3 of the stories we picked out for August is, first of all, Parliament again in London was debating privatising Channel 4. Now let's go over Channel 4's status. It is, of course, funded by advertising, as you'll know. There's some very good programmes on Channel 4 and some very annoying adverts. But it is a public service broadcaster, and in particular its news coverage is widely praised. Jon Snow, in fact, has just retired and received a big warm send-off. But I think in Scotland, people show more respect for Channel 4 News than for other broadcasters.
Yeah.
So what do you think are the issues around privatising? Is it still going to be a public service broadcaster to be trusted?
Well, see, this is the thing. It kind of confused me when this story broke in August, because I thought it was already privatised, funded by the adverts. I didn't realise it was classified as a public interest company. And that's where Nadine Dorries kind of made a fool of herself. And the thing is, she's the Secretary of State of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. So, I mean, fair dues me getting a bit confused. I'm just Joe Blogs and the pub, the person sitting at the other side watching it. That's not my job to know, what is in the public domain and what's not. Whereas Nadine Dorries, you would think with her being the Secretary of State, you would have thought that that's her job. She should have known. And yet she made such a big boo-boo live on TV about this one. What did you make of that one, Brian?
I loved that. I loved it. I think you'll find it easily on Twitter, I'm sure, if you do a quick search. Yeah, basically, she said Nadine Dorries sat in front of an inquiry committee in Westminster and blatantly said, "I don't think companies like Channel 4 should be getting public money to produce the kind of news reports that the Westminster government doesn't like, basically, because and she was informed straight away that Channel 4 doesn't receive any public funds. It is funded by adverts. There may be some shareholders, I'm not sure, but it's owned by us, it's owned by the public, but we don't pay for it. It's revenues are raised in other ways. And again, that's another key thing, I think. It's like, as you said, you're absolutely right. Channel 4, especially their news and their journalism, is a good standard. Indeed, the First Minister, I think, has just, when Jon Snow retired, has said that he's going to become an honorary Scot post-independence. So the First Minister acknowledges that. But they produce news which upsets the current government in Westminster, and that's why the government in Westminster wants to privatise it and sell it off.
Yep. And another good thing we should say from our point of view is that Channel 4 actually does have an office in just a couple of miles from here, actually down by the Clyde, and they do have journalists reported in Scotland. Maybe the Scottish Government maybe doesn't always like the questioning, but she has said, yeah, I'm here to accept tough questions, that's okay. But they are widely respected for doing their job properly. And as you said, Brian, the Conservative Government very often refuse to go on Channel 4 programmes.
Indeed, Douglas Ross on that same inquiry, I believe, the only problem he seemed to have with Channel 4 was that they didn't have any Scottish families on
That's right.
on Gogglebox or something like that. So, and that was his biggest beef with Channel 4. You know, he's really not so worried about the threat to privatisation.
Oh, but that's Douglas Ross for you, isn't it?
Yeah, and if it happens, if Channel 4 is privatised, then that's weakening journalism in this country. And one of the last that actually we can rely on. So.
Yep.
Apart from Broadcasting Scotland, of course.
Well, we are here for public service broadcasting anyway. And by the way, Ms. Doris, we don't get any public funding, but if there's any going spare, tell us where to apply. The big story really that happened in August was the Taliban takeover of the government of Afghanistan. And this happened, as we were discussing earlier on, in a sneaky way when the government was on holiday.
Oh, I mean, the Taliban, crikey, they're so clever to work out when the UK government is going to be on holiday. That was just heartbreaking to watch, to see that unfold live on TV. Didn't matter what news broadcaster you were watching it on or social media outlet. It was just heartbreaking to watch how easily the Afghanistan government fell to the Taliban and how scared people were. And that's why they felt, because they were so terrified. And then to find out, oh my goodness, the majority of the UK government was actually on holiday and were refusing telephone calls. And I think with the inquiry, it came out that there was only one person taking all the emails and things, which was just absolutely horrendous, because at the end of the day, regardless of what your political position is in terms of the UK, at the end of the day, there were still citizens of the UK living in Afghanistan, working in Afghanistan, who were stuck there, trapped there, and who probably still are. There was people Afghanistan nationals who worked for the British consulate who are probably still trapped in Afghanistan, and they were treated with complete contempt. And it is heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking, and it's still heartbreaking when you watch reports coming in from Afghanistan, because at the moment I think they've went into an economic famine because of the fall. I don't know what your take on it is, Brian, when you were watching it.
Again, so much, but I suppose I've got to start, just as you say, those heartrending images and footage, of parents passing their babies to a soldier over the wall, as I have to say, take my baby and hope it survives, and just incredible. And meanwhile, it seemed that those few people here in the British government who were trying to deal with it, they were willing to, or they were more interested in one man's campaign to get pets, cats and dogs,
That's
onto
right.
a plane. Now, nobody, any animals that did make it onto British aircraft were carried in the hold. It's not like there were cats and dogs taking up seats that would have been occupied by humans, but resources, people's time and effort went into that rather than trying to rescue.
Did that not come out
humans.
with a letter where there was a note by Carrie Johnson that it was a friend of that charity? So
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's true, but yeah,
yeah,
apparently
there's
that came.
allegations, isn't there?
The reason, that emphasis upon saving pets and animals was because that's what Carrie Johnson wanted. I have heard that.
Yeah, there was an allegation, wasn't there? But nobody.
That was suggested. That wasn't reported in the UK press. Does this indicate the end of that long policy of UK and Britain, the policy of regime change, the idea that we can move into a country that we don't like and remove the government and install a new one, like installing a new central heating boiler and then expecting it to actually work? It's been tried twice in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Complete failure in both occasions, and people left behind suffering, picking up the pieces. So that is that discredited policy now completely finished, and does that mean the West is finished? The West is no longer a power in that area?
I hadn't thought about that before, but I wonder if that could be one of the few very rare and precious good things to come out of Brexit, because I do think that Britain, post-Brexit, is diminished as a world player, and so maybe we just won't have the clout to be able to start those kinds of conflicts, and so we'll just be kind of just a bit more peaceful, perhaps down the road.
Yeah, I would like to think so. I agree with Brian. Yeah, we after post-Brexit, the British Empire has lost its standing on the worldwide stage. So yeah, it would be nice to think that now that they won't have the arrogance to go in and try to do regime changes and things. But then again, it's the British Empire.
Well, yeah, and because that's what I was going to say was,
It's the British Empire.
sadly, we won't learn from human loss and suffering from incidents like this. It's not as if the British government would look at what's happened and how things have unfolded and ended and then say, maybe we should change our approach here and stop causing this kind of conflict. It would just be a consequence of Brexit.
Yep.
So,
yes, it's definitely clear. I would say that the British position was always subordinate to the American position, so we shouldn't forget that the reason Britain withdrew from Afghanistan is because President Biden announced we are out of Afghanistan, so there is no possibility of Britain forming an independent policy.
Was that when Dominic, I know we've got to move on, but was that when Dominic Raab was at a beach where the sea was closed?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah, he was on holiday.
The Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary.
Yeah, the Prime Minister
were
was
on
away
holiday
painting, and Dominic Raab was given
when the policy
sunshine.
collapsed.
Yeah.
I suppose, there's much to say, but I know we need to move on, but I'll just briefly. David Pratt, the foreign correspondent for the Herald and the National, was saying this morning that whether we like the Taliban or not, and we don't, the fact is they are in charge.
They are in charge.
I think you mentioned that country is facing appalling shortages and hardships.
We need to
over
work
this
with
winter.
them, regardless of whether you agree with them or not, or disagree with them. They're in charge. Even though it's not democratically in charge, they are still in charge, and we still need to be working with them, because at the end of the day, if we don't, it's the civilians that are going to suffer, and they are currently suffering at the moment, and that's the realistic.
So the reason this matters is because they can't use their own money. All assets have been frozen. The banking system isn't working. So the West has to reopen the ability of the Afghan Taliban government to actually trade and raise money. So at the moment they can't do anything because the money's frozen. So that's pragmatic politics. If that's the government they've got there, we'll just have to deal with them. That's what David Pratt was arguing today. Now, and also, let's not forget that what President Biden was doing is actually a continuation of Donald Trump's policy. Although he's America first, very nationalistic, but at the same time, he was also promoting this idea we should stay at home. And so actually, the Republicans themselves seem to have drawn a line under that regime change agenda. So both in Brexit and in America, there's this tendency to narrow down the range of their ambition.
And I was just going to flag up, because I know that we really probably do have to move on, but there's a very good podcast where in the New European website where Bonnie Greer gives a really interesting take on her views about that transfer from Trump to Biden and the likes of Afghanistan, and so I'd thoroughly recommend it to. It's only a couple of weeks ago, you don't have to go very far back to find it.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, yes, as you say, we better move on. There's just too much. The final thing we wanted to very briefly talk about is the new Scottish Government, of course, which took over in the summer following the success in the May general election for, first of all, the SNP, which achieved its best result ever, really, at Holyrood, and also for the return of, is it 6 or 7 Scottish Green Party candidates? I think it was 7, but 1 is the presiding officer.
Yes,
so
that's
six,
correct,
6
yeah,
who vote. So they finally announced, after a lot of negotiations, that they would form some kind of understanding, not quite a coalition. So is coalition the way forward for Scotland, for Wales, and also power sharing in Northern Ireland?
I think it is. I think it's a progressive way to deal with politics, and it's a more democratic way of dealing with politics and governments as well. Because you see it across the world where you have governments that have some sort of agreement with another party, whether it's a coalition, an agreement, depending on the wording.
It's happening in Wales now, isn't it?
Yeah, depending on the wording. And it's a more progressive way, because the thing is, when you've got one party in power, things can become quite narrow in policies and things. And I always say a new set of eyes are better than an old set of eyes. So it's good to have people coming in from another angle. And the good thing about SNP and Greens, they are two independent supporting parties. And that basically it strengthens the independence movement. It strengthens the independence cause, because up until now, if you look at politics down in Westminster, away from Scotland, they seem to try to marginalise the independence movement as being SNP only. And they are very focused on SNP bad and all the negativity, and they don't seem to understand that independence is more than party politics. It's about the people, it's about the nation, it's about the community, it's the culture, it's everything. So having these two parties coming together enforces that, which is quite good. And we're already seeing some really good deals coming through, good policies coming through. And I imagine it's going to get stronger and better. That's my opinion on the SNP Green Deal.
Well,
I know a lot of people don't agree with me on that one. What do you think of it, Brian?
I agree with you. I think they complement each other. I think that we've already seen that how the Green Party have influenced or changed the SNP, but in a good way.
Yeah.
I thought it was great to see, like, almost the very next day, once they'd come to the agreement, and I think there was it FMQs? I can't remember, but anyway, certainly very soon, like the day or so after, you'd see Patrick Harvey or Lorna Slater standing up, answering questions from the opposition, and I thought that was a breath of fresh air, you know, because we're getting the Green take on things rather than the SNP
So
take.
it widens out the appeal, and it kind of widens out the, if you like, the authenticity, or the what's the word, the kind of the representative nature of the Scottish Parliament. As we know, when you have a system like Westminster's, they're not really representative. You can be elected with something like 34% of the electorate, but that's not possible in Scotland. It's more of a European system too. Also, the German Greens are now in coalition with the new Olaf Scholz government, which just took over a couple of weeks ago, and that's quite normal in Europe. I guess some Westminster commentators don't seem to understand that we have a PR system here.
No,
and they
don't.
said, you don't have an overall majority. Well, you don't get overall majorities
No, the
with
systems,
PR voting.
Yeah, the system in Scotland is designed that there isn't really a majority. But that's the thing, that's what you want. You want a progressive politics, you want, you know, democracy to go right through the system, right up until the point of government, where you are getting that collaboration between parties. And I mean, they're not always going to agree. There's I mean, the two parties have got their very distinct natures of their parties. But the fact it shows that we can be adult enough. It's adult politics.
But I think you're absolutely right, and I think they don't agree on everything,
No,
and so that's fine. That's politics. That's democracy. But At the same time, I think the Greens have been really canny, because I think the fact that they haven't gone into a full-blown coalition, it's given them a little bit of wriggle room.
Yeah.
It's given them a little bit of independence. They can still criticise, maybe not criticise the government, but they can certainly still put their views across. I would also say that maybe when it comes to the sort of things which year after year after year that get long drawn out and takes ages, like every budget that has to get signed off every year, and it can go on and on and on, and then the Greens eventually agree to support it, and then it passes. Those things will happen a lot quicker now, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, get on with more important things. And
Well, indeed it did, because the Scottish budget already did pass just a couple of weeks ago, so we didn't have that usual kind of
that
horse
on and
trading that
on
you talk
and-
about. Like, we must move on now, because we only have an hour. Maybe we should have made this a 3-hour programme,
We
because
should
there's 3 of
have,
us.
yeah.
We also... so just moving on to September, we've picked out a couple of stories here. First of all, one of the many Brexit stories. We noted then that UK exports to the European Union had plunged with the latest figures from Brexit, which really came in earlier on in January this year. So not a massive surprise there, is it, Brian?
No, and I don't have the actual figures to my fingertips, but I've been following Brexit quite closely, just because it's a car crash, and just watching it unfold. And this thing about, we left the EU on the 1st of January, and you'll often hear that, that's it, Brexit's done, we've left, Britain has, and technically that's true. But so many cans got kicked down the road that we didn't see what changes that meant or how that was going to affect us. But now we're starting to see, and of course it's masked by COVID, because that's now kind of lying over the top, and the two things kind of get muddied. But it's definitely, it's incredible to see the figures that are coming out about the bad things that are coming out of Brexit.
There was a report quite recently, in the second half of this year, from, I think it was the government's favourite independent think tank, the Fiscal Studies Institute, I think it was. They monitored the economic damage to COVID against Brexit, and they reckoned that Brexit is worse. Brexit will,
That
I
does
think, bring
not
down
surprise me.
down the economy by something like 4% over the next couple of years.
I mean, I know we're talking about the exports to the EU plunge following Brexit, but as a small business owner, and lots of other people that I know are small business owners, it's affected us hugely, because the cost of trying to post things to worldwide has the cost of is just risen dramatically, and because of the lack of trade deals around the world. So America's one of them, because we don't have a trade deal with America. The EU, the cost of so a lot of us have had to actually stop posting around the world. And even for supplies, because a lot of us use, the European Union for supplies and things, a lot of these places won't post into the UK now.
It's not worth their while.
It's not worth their while because of the cost. And it is just absolutely horrendous, and it is affecting businesses right across, whether you're a small person, one-man business, or a huge international business. It is affecting right across, and that affects the local economies as well. And it goes in and starts affecting, it has a snowball effect or a domino effect right across the board. So, but yeah, COVID's kind of masked that a wee bit. But every now and again, as you say, there's a study done and you can see the damage that Brexit is actually doing.
And again, it's not over yet,
No, it's
because tomorrow, 1st of January, more new changes come in, which are going to hamper trade even
Yes,
more.
there's several over the next few months, starting indeed
Yeah.
next week, and then again rolling. More of the measures are actually going to start to bite. So obviously that's, again, as I keep saying, that's a story we will unfortunately have to return to. Before we move on to September, one of the worst stories we had in the UK in the last year was the appalling murder of Sarah Everard by a policeman. Now in September we found the police officer guilty. I forget his name, but let's not bother with his name. He was in fact sentenced to a whole life, and that was announced on the 30th September. So everyone was shocked, and I think probably most police officers were shocked as well once it turned out what this guy had done. Well, he's had the book thrown at him, hasn't he? He's not getting out.
What was shocking was the fact that it came out that there was suspicions about his behaviour beforehand, and nothing was actually done about it. and that was the most shocking aspect.
His nickname was the racist, I think, wasn't it? In the
Yeah,
locker room?
there was other things. So that was one of the most shocking things, because you look at the police as being the protectors. So for that to happen, and yes, we know that not, this happens. Police generally are the protectors, but unfortunately people are human beings, and you're getting people from all different societies going into different institutions and things, so you are going to get these people kind of slipping through the net and being there. But one of the things that came out with this was people's what's the word, being able to talk more openly about safety of women, but also as well the behaviour of I'm going to say men, because I don't mean all men, but there is an element of society where there is a bit of misogyny and where it's accepted, and it's about education. And when I say education, I'm talking about teaching our kids what's acceptable, and it's not about taking away the banter that we all have, because we all have a bit of banter and things like that. It's knowing when that banter steps over the line and becomes dangerous. And it's for other men to feel safe to call out men who have stepped over that line, because sometimes when there's a bit of banter and there's a female and there's a group of men and even a group of women are just as bad sometimes, where somebody can say something which does step over the line, but nobody feels comfortable actually coming out and saying, excuse me, but do you want to rein it in a bit? That's a bit out of order. They just kind of maybe uncomfortably laugh and then maybe try and change the subject. So it's about people taking more responsibility and saying, look, that's not acceptable. And it's about, at the end of the day, we want our children to grow up and have healthy relationships. And that's not just talking about the relationships with a partner, that's about friendships, it's about relationships with their siblings, their peers, and it's about having the conversations.
Yes, but the individual in that situation where there is what is sometimes called a locker room culture, has to feel, I don't like that, but am I going to stand up and speak up? In fact, I've heard the rumour that he had this nickname of the rapist apparently, but did nobody think, wait a minute, that's not right,
And yes, and Sam, I agree with what you're saying. It's about how do we change young men, boys, and men's behaviour. So have you seen the "Don't Be That Guy" campaign by the Scottish Government? I think that kind of is an attempt to tackle that kind of behaviour, and I'd like to think. I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not going to be all men, and you had a good discussion with Professor John Robertson about how it's a minority of police officers, but as our colleague Maggie Lennon I've heard her say it many times on here in Broadcasting Scotland, she'll say, well, that may be well and good. She said, but I don't know which ones are the good men and which ones are the... They
don't wear a badge.
So, exactly.
They don't wear a badge of honour going, I'm a good man.
Exactly. So hopefully it's the start. I think that this incident and the reaction to it, which was widespread and seems to be almost universal, I'd like to think it's the start of something that's going to change.
I think, even us as women, it's about being able to stand up and say to, and it's very difficult as a woman if you're on the receiving end. And the sad fact is there's probably not a woman alive who hasn't been at the subject of a man being over frivolous or being really try to pick my words carefully here, and not basically being overly friendly and
crossing that line.
And it's crossing that line.
Yeah.
And as a young girl or a young woman, it's very difficult for women who might not be confident and might be scared or sometimes might not recognise it. And that might sound silly to some people, but sometimes when these things situate, it's not until afterwards and you go, oh my goodness, they touched me or they said and that was inappropriate. But at the time, your brain sometimes does go into that kind of freeze mode. And the thing is recognising that it's not until us women get a bit old, a lot of us when we get a bit older and we've been in these situations, we get a bit more gobby, and and especially Scottish women, we can be a bit gobby, which is a good thing, and we can put men in their place. But not all women feel like that, and no women should feel that they need to put a man or another woman, because sometimes other women can be like that as well. Where there's a crowd of mixed people, and if a man or somebody's saying something, the women can join in and do that as well.
Maybe.
So it's not just a male-female thing. It's it's not a gender thing. It's right across the board, and it's all about being acceptable. Because at the end of the day, we want a society that everybody feels safe in.
Yes, it's all about, as you said earlier on, about being adult. Part of that is showing respect and having confidence in who you are and showing respect to other persons.
It's not PC-ness gone mad.
Absolutely.
It's not. It's about respect,
yes.
about respect for your fellow human beings, and
good.
being an adult about it.
Let's move on that note. Sam, thank you. Now, moving on to October, we've just got a couple of stories. We've only got time to look at 2 stories here. We heard then from the UK government that the long-awaited carbon capture scheme up in Aberdeen near St Fergus, the Acorn carbon capture scheme, was going to be stopped, or at least it's going to be knocked into 2030. It was put on the reserve list, and 2 other schemes in England were given the go-ahead. This is by the UK government. So again, this is a story where the Scottish government and engineering firms were putting a lot of effort into promoting the Fergus scheme as part of the just transition away from oil and gas. It was a big scheme, a lot of political will, if you like, had been invested in it, but it's been cancelled. It's off the agenda because the government of Westminster decided no. Right, so again, is this an example of imbalance of powers?
Is this the scheme that didn't go ahead because the Westminster government decided to give the money to the northeast of England, or is
Well,
that
there's 2
separate?
schemes, one in the northeast and the other one in Merseyside, and so
Which
they
neither of
decided-
them is as far ahead as and would take.
the one in Aberdeen was to use the existing pipelines and using basically the spaces below the ground that they'd taken the oil out of to put the CO2 back in.
I was just making sure I was on the. I've heard a lot of people say that they think that this carbon capture idea is a bit of a red herring. It's just trying to distract us from making real changes to stop climate change. I'm not an engineer. I don't know. But if that is the case, the fact that it isn't even going to be given a chance, so we're not going to find out if that was true here in Scotland, because Westminster decided to fund similar projects in England. So I think there is
it was up to Westminster. So it is a thing which the Scottish government had put a lot of effort into, and so there's an engineering firm in charge of drawing up a blueprint for the whole thing, but they're not getting the go-ahead because it was cancelled by London.
I'm going to kind of come in from there. There's currently 21 large-scale carbon capture sites around the world. The first one was in 1972 in Texas. I've done my research. Now, the thing is with carbon capture, it is seen as a way of cutting down on emissions. The problem with it is nobody knows what's going to happen in the long term, because the carbon, when these big producers are producing carbon dioxide, it gets captured before it hits the atmosphere, and it gets put in pipes, gets put in trucks, ships and whatever, and then it gets stored underground. The problem is we don't know the long-term effects with it being stored underground, because nobody knows. It's a bit about going way back when we used to store radioactive stuff underground. The Centre for International Environmental Law basically don't agree with it. There's so many problems with it, and there's not enough studies done to say if it's definitely safe. And now, if you're going back to 1972, you should be able to say, yeah, this is definitely safe. Nobody knows, and that's the problem.
It still is an untried
But the problem
technology.
is, again, going back to the original question about Westminster, that decision was taken out of Scotland's hands. That debate was taken away from Scotland, and whether you agree with capture or not, or fossil fuels or anything like that, it's the fact that we were not able to have that debate
That's
in
right.
our
So,
Parliament, and
even
that's
even
the
though
problem.
Yes,
this was going to be the
so
cheapest
I'll
and
have to-
quickest and easiest. And
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll have to
Sorry.
move on. Yeah, but just to summarise, yes, it's not Scotland's decision.
Yeah.
There are debates about it, as you say.
Wasn't
but
wasn't there
but
a
we don't have a
recent?
chance. We don't have a choice at the moment because it's a reserve power. Now we're going to move on to the other big story which happened in October, which was that the UK government finally dropped the temporary £20 uplift to universal credit. That was brought in during the COVID period, and against opposition, they decided to drop it. That happened in October.
That was just horrendous. I can't believe. Then I'm going to say I can't believe that they've done it, but yes, I can, because it's the Tory government. They do not have a heart. The fact was that £20 a week, it's not a lot of money in terms of the coffers, but it's a lot of money for families who are who live within the poverty margin. The thing is what people forget about universal credit. It's not just people that are unemployed that are on universal credit, it's people who are working, who have got low income, who are also on universal credit. And that has penalised so
Yep.
many people, especially with it coming into winter, the dropping temperatures, the soaring energy prices, and and the soaring food prices as well, may I add, because that's just went absolutely crazy. And these people, and when you see what they paid for test and trace, that's kind of went out the window, and they basically complain about £20 a week for families.
Yep,
It's
of course.
just unbelievable.
Again, this is a UK issue. The Scottish Government was, however, able to mitigate that, of course, in the recent budget with the child payment. That goes to some way to helping it, and that's going to be put up to £20 from April in the new budget. But again, we must move on. I'm going to have to quickly take you to November. And the United Nations COP26, the Conference of the Parties to discuss climate change, met, of course, 2 miles down the road from here in the centre of Glasgow at the SEC. So what would you say, Brian, do you think were the main impressions and the main conclusions that you got out of the COP26?
There's a lot to cover there. I'll start off just by saying, just as a Glaswegian, as a resident of Glasgow, it was interesting to see an event of that scale happen here. Usually you read the news and it's happening in Paris or New York, and it's like, and here it was in Glasgow. That was interesting. I know a lot of people complained about how it affected public transport and the like, but still, it was to see it unfold in your living room, so to speak, was worthwhile. In terms of the final decision, apparently it could have been better. Greta Thunberg, apparently she's not going to be that impressed.
Well, is that understandable, Sam? Do you share Greta Thunberg's
Yes, I do,
dismay?
because it was basically a pile of greenwash. I'll use the polite words. Basically, it was great to see it being hosted in Glasgow. It was great to see Glasgow being in the centre of the world stage. But in terms of what was actually happening, it was, a lot of leaders basically bumping their gums, making policies which are really, we need change right now, because climate crisis is actually happening now, which we're seeing all the time around the world. We report about it on here, and you see it on other media outlets. It's happening right now, so things need to be. It was the governments, you could see, were kind of going to the side of the big multi-international organisations that don't really want to spend the money to make a difference. But the one thing that I take from COP26, the positive that I take from COP26, was the fact of the Scottish Government's behaviour. During COP26, they were absolutely amazing. And Nicola Sturgeon was, like or loathe Nicola Sturgeon, but she behaved like a stateswoman. And basically, what she done was put Scotland on the world stage for independence. And you've seen the way the world leaders, the way the reports were coming in from across the world, talking about Scotland and how we would like to be a bit more green friendlier and do all these things. We're more progressive than Westminster, but we're getting held back. And I went on a couple of the protests, and again, people from around the world. It was amazing. And they kind of got the fact, that the fact that we are progressive, we want to see change, we want to do things, but our hands are tied by shackles. And that's the positive that I take from COP26, that it put us in the world stage.
Yes, we reported at the time the Scottish Government actually sponsored several initiatives
Yes.
because although Johnson had this nonsense, Prime Minister Johnson said about a year ago, I don't want Nicola Sturgeon to be anywhere near COP26, but that didn't happen. She was there every day. He wasn't. And in fact, the Scottish Government signed several international agreements with other sub-state organisations such as the State of California. They signed a statement right here on biodiversity. So the Scottish Government worked the conference. And in fact, they were broadcast widely, not in Scotland, not in the BBC, but they were broadcast. Nicola Sturgeon was all over the media, but not in this country, funnily enough. Again, we must move on.
Well, before you do, Hugh, we've got to at least say that as part of COP26, we were really proud to host our friend Ika from CNN N1. So if she's watching, all the best.
Yes,
And,
Bosnian TV
thank you
was actually partnered with Broadcasting Scotland, and yes, some of those live broadcasts came from right here. The other thing that happened in November is that we had the first 6 cases of the Omicron variant. First 6 cases were identified in November, just a few weeks ago, just about 5 or 6 weeks ago. And now, I heard the other day, it's 85%, as the First Minister said. This will spread, and it will spread quickly. She was right about that, wasn't she? We had something like 15,000 infections yesterday.
Yeah, spreading like wildfire, isn't it?
So, and again, that's a story we're going to come back to. So it just underlines, as you were saying earlier on, Brian, looking back at Freedom Day, the 1st of July, that lasted until November. So I think we'll just have to swiftly move on to this month of December. We're going to highlight very quickly 3 stories. First of all, if you go down to Shrewsbury, just to the west of Stoke-on-Trent, you're in North Shropshire, a beautiful county of rolling hills and Tory voters. Something very strange happened in the by-election on the 17th of December. This seat, I think, had been Tory for about 8,000 years, approximately.
According to the Tories. Yeah, it was, wasn't it? And it ended up they lost dramatically to the Lib Dems.
Yeah, that was quite a wonder to watch unfold because it all came about. The by-election was caused by the toppling of Owen Paterson, who came a cropper because he was found guilty of taking money for lobbying, amongst other things.
Oh dear, how dare he? Oh,
he was taking money without mentioning it.
Yes.
He was writing to government departments recommending companies that he was working for without telling them, by the way, I'm on their payroll.
Yeah, using Houses of Parliament headed notepaper and
taking a wee fee. Was he not a consultant for?
Yes.
He was getting several tens of thousands from 2 companies while working as an MP.
Oh, but we're meant to believe that he is trustworthy.
Yeah, but so not only did his departure as a result of that, I mean, before that happened, also there's also the fact that the Westminster government tried to change the laws retrospectively so that he would be let off the hook. But we need to get on to how this affects Scotland. So Owen Paterson leaves the stage, and then we have the resulting campaign for should MPs have more than one job, and if they do have more than one job, does that dilute their main job, the job that we pay them to do, which is to represent us in Parliament? So that's still ongoing. And then, of course, it's just
I guess the main thing it does for us in Scotland is to seriously wound the Prime Minister. So he really was hauled below the waterline. Yes. That was a shocking week for Prime Minister Johnson.
Well, the thing is there were talking. I mean, the Scottish Tories up here are always going on about ethics and things like that, and it just goes to show you they don't have the same standards as down in England, and Westminster. The way that they tried to change the rules and the law to protect Owen Paterson, which was quite. But yeah, with the jobs, I mean. Our old friend.
The best example.
Murray Ross.
Douglas Ross.
Douglas Ross, Murray Ross, right. Who, according to Boris Johnson, it's Murray Ross, basically, who has 3 jobs, and how does that work with him? Because how is he able to serve his constituents? appropriately.
Well, it just shows that these are top people, of course, able to do 3 jobs, able to keep 3 plates spinning at the
Or
same
it
time.
could
Wish
be
I could do that.
the fact, yeah.
I'm hastily trying to move on now. Can we very briefly talk on news that just came through to us last night from New York that a British woman, a socialite, Ghislaine Maxwell, was found guilty of 5 out of 6 charges of basically trafficking young women for sex purposes. As a partner with the sex pest who already killed himself in jail a year ago, financier. And Maxwell is the daughter of the late and not very lamented millionaire Robert Maxwell. And she's now going to face a maximum of maybe up to 65 years in the New York jail. So very briefly, we don't know who else is going to be maybe targeted, and we're not going to mention any names, but Ghislaine Maxwell apparently had a big book of names. So
A wee black book.
A wee
names.
black book, yeah. I want to see that wee black book.
Yeah,
that would be interesting.
there is one person who's been implicated that we can refer to though, and his mother owns a big estate up in Balmoral, and
Right.
apparently that's...
Oh, is that the person that wears the crown? Yeah.
Interesting,
And
right.
apparently
her
when
son.
her son Andrew, apparently the Queen's favourite of all her children, and so they say, and I think he holed himself up in Balmoral when this news was breaking, so just to keep out of the
Is he not
limelight.
hiding down in Windsor at the moment?
No, we don't know where it is.
Yeah,
but maybe
but
the
no.
prosecutors in New York might be looking for him. But
Yeah, they will be, but no, it's good to see that she was found guilty of the 5 charges out of 6. The end of the day, it just goes to show that nobody's above the law, and it's good to see that the defence attorney over in New York were determined and they put across a very good case. And, you know, my heart goes out to the victims. They were so strong to do this. That's not an easy thing to do, to stand up in court, because the thing is, their lives will have been blighted by this from such a young age. And it's, you know, it's a psychological part afterwards as well. And even going to court, that's the psychological trauma with going to court and standing up as well. So well done to the girls.
Absolutely,
or
yes.
women as they are now. And I
course.
hope, and I do hope they've got counsellors and everything at the other
yes,
side.
I have heard reports on that.
Because
their
they
testimony.
will now, it's like reliving the trauma. So they'll be back to square one emotionally.
Yep,
So they need a lot of support. And it'll be interesting to see what happens next. And I hope more people, I hope the cards will now fall and more people will be held accountable for what they did to all these young
Yeah,
women.
so congratulations to the women who came forward.
Yeah.
And let's hear from New York State prosecutors.
Yeah,
They've
they've
got
done
a
brilliant.
number of interesting cases in their in-tray, including one against Donald Trump. So we'll see. You know, those New York prosecutors, once they get hold of the case, they don't let
it's like
go.
a dog with a bone,
Aye.
isn't it?
So let's just conclude. We've got one final story which we thought was worth mentioning, that towards the end of this year, we had another independence poll, pro-independence, putting the yes vote at 55%. Now, we haven't got time to discuss that, so let's just summarise by saying there's been a number of polls over the year. I suppose basically it's still 50-50. Some are a bit up, yes is ahead, some no's ahead. But basically, Scotland still has to make its mind up in the next year, or up to 2023, about whether we want to be a country or not. So it's up to our fellow citizens to make that decision. It's up to nobody else. It's certainly not up to Prime Minister Johnson. I have to conclude now. So let's first of all just remind our viewers and the subscribers that Broadcasting Scotland receives no public money at all. We will be writing to Nadine Dorries, but if she fails to come up with the goods, it's you, our subscribers, who are actually making these programmes. So thank you for being our partners. And if you would like to become one of our subscribers, please look at the website. The website is also the place to find the previous broadcasts, like the first half of the year summary, which we put out earlier on in the week. Starting off from £5 a month, if you'd like to subscribe, you will be helping to build up Broadcasting Scotland. As we move into this new year, the Scottish Parliament is going to discuss the independence referendum sometime in the next few months. So I think Scotland is going to need proper independent broadcasting. So we have but 2 things to say. So first of all, on behalf of Sam Paton and with Brian Liddy, we'd like to wish you all a good new year. And so thanks for watching us.
Don't
And
forget,
finally, We're now going to, we also, penultimately, if you come on again, 11 o'clock tonight, we've got a wee musical special for you. We have prepared Hogmanay from the Dungeon, and I'm afraid I'm going to be singing some songs, but I've also got some proper musicians in to help me. So we're going to be singing the bells on broadcasting. Thank you for reminding me. 11 o'clock, right to just after the bells. Music from the Dungeon down below here at Broadcasting Scotland. And now, finally, we're going to hand over to the First Minister, and we can, if you spare a couple of minutes, we can hear Nicola Sturgeon's New Year's message. So, from myself, Hugh Stewart, from Sam Paton and from Brian Liddy and the rest of the team here at Broadcasting Scotland, thanks for watching. Have a good New Year.
Happy New Year.
2021 has been dominated by the challenges of COVID. Throughout this year, our health and care workers have continued to do an absolutely magnificent job. And those working on our vaccination programme have provided all of us with an incredible service. Thanks to their efforts and also thanks to the sacrifices of people right across the country, earlier this year businesses were able to reopen. Schools stayed open throughout the autumn and our public services were able to remobilise. And near the end of the year at the COP26 summit, Glasgow was able to welcome the world to the most important international gathering ever held in this country. And I know that all of us at different times will have had reunions with friends that felt a bit more precious for being so hard won. The fact that we made so much progress is a real achievement. But of course, it also makes it all the more cruel that now, so late on in the year, we are facing a new challenge. The Omicron variant is a very significant threat. It means that at the moment, we need above all to keep each other safe. We all need to stay at home far more than we would want to at this time of year, and we have asked that you minimise New Year socialising as much as you can. So this is not the Hogmanay we all wanted and hoped for, but I believe that we can still look ahead to 2022 with optimism. An important reason for that is that so many of you in the past few days have gone out to get your booster before the bells. I am so incredibly grateful to you for that, and for all the other sacrifices you have made throughout this difficult year. In the coming year, our vaccination programme will continue to enable us to make our way back to greater normality. And we will continue to work to rebuild our society and our economy, for example, by supporting businesses in the move to net zero and starting work to establish a new national care service. As we come through this pandemic, there will still, I am sure, be setbacks. But as we look back on the challenges we have faced this year, I believe we can also look forward to a much better and brighter new year ahead. So as you see in the bells, I want to take the opportunity to wish all of you a good Hogmanay, and to everyone, whether you're in Scotland or further afield, let me wish all of you a very happy, healthy and peaceful new year. Happy New Year.